This episode is powered by Podcast Startup, the learning platform for creators with a voice. Podcast Startup covers tech, production, editing, marketing, and more. I know what it feels like to be slowed down by challenges revolving around fear, procrastination, and tech, yet I've recorded and published over 260 podcast episodes, which encompasses this podcast and the Unstarving musician. To learn more about Podcast Startup, go to morningtempo.com/podcast startup, and to get free podcasting startup tips to your inbox. Again, visit morningtempo.com/podcast startup to learn more and to get your free podcasting startup tips. Let's do this. This is the Morning Tempo Podcast. I am your host, Rabanzo. On this podcast, I have conversations with business owners and the entrepreneurial with the slant toward creativity. It's an opportunity for you to learn with me from people who are finding success in the business world, all intended to make your entrepreneurial journey a little bit easier. Welcome to another episode, my little ducklings. Ana Shevier of the podcast space is my guest for this episode. She and I met at Podcast Movement 2021 in Nashville last year, 2021. It's 2022 now, in case you're listening to this in the future. Like, way into the future. She is a podcast industry expert, and I do not use the term expert lightly here. Podcast Space, her company, offers a broad range of services to podcasters, but she's niching it down. Always, I think. We talk about our respective experiences at Podcast Movement 2021, the creativity she pours into her business and on socials, creator overwhelm, growing a podcast on a limited budget, social media engagement, converting listeners and social media folk into customers, and more. There's always more. Man, it was great catching up with Ana. The beginning is a very casual conversation, and I had to include the first words I recorded, because, as I told Ana, she has a sultry podcast voice. It could be because she was asking about my sometimes co-host Jessica. I don't know, could have been some tension there, or not, maybe. Maybe I'm just making things up in my head and trying to be silly. Speaking of things in my head, I decided I wanted to share something with you, a little off the beaten track, so I hope you'll indulge me before we get to my chat with Ana. I have spent time recently with friends who don't give a shit what people think. You know these people, and perhaps like you, some of them are among your close friends, or I should say perhaps like me, some of them are among your close friends. I'm not really that way though, and in that I do give a shit, but if I'm being honest, I'd like to give a lesser shit what people think. And this is a struggle because I also think a lot about compassion, about expanding my own ability to be a compassionate person. My natural tendency, or when I've had a couple of beers or glasses of wine, is to say things that I think are funny at the risk of not being all that compassionate. And it turns out sometimes it is funny to others, but it has backfired on occasion, or many times actually. It's backfired many times. I got some well-intended professional counseling on this topic of overtly expressing my sense of humor around coworkers or mentees, my team members. I do it with my bandmates a lot. They put up with me, which is great, but it's really nice, actually. But getting back to my friends who could give a lesser shit, there is something there that I admire, even if I sometimes think, oh man, that was a bit over the top, don't you think? Sometimes I come out and say as much, but still, I just sometimes wish I gave a lesser shit. Anyway, that's what I wanted to get off my chest. Ana is great. She has so much energy. That's what I love about her. One of the things I love about her, next to the fact that she is a bit zany, as you'll find out by visiting her Instagram page. So you can find out everything about Ana Shevier at thepodcastspace.com and at the podcast space on pretty much all the socials, the Facebook, Twitter, Pinsta, or Pinterest. So check her out. You will encounter some really cool free resources if you're a podcaster. If you're an entrepreneur, you will likely find something very inspiring, unless her zaniness is not your cup of tea, but I think she's pretty funny. All right, here is me and my newish friend, Ana Shevier.
Called Jessica.
Yes, very good memory. She couldn't be with us today. Yeah. Too bad too, because I know she would have much more fun interviewing the ladies. But this way I
Yes.
get you all to myself. It's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
Jessica
true.
couldn't be with us, so
Aw.
I know I'll make her listen to this one or make her watch a clip of the video so she can see what she missed.
Yes, I think she should. I prepare myself. I was like, I think like the sign of my company is right behind me. And I'm like, I don't have time to set this up like differently.
There's a kind of a
Record.
nail hole behind me that you can barely see, but I was like, I'm gonna put an Unstarving musician sticker on there. And then I was like, oh, I could make one of those things like Pat Flynn with the sticker really easy. Just put a thing right here so my mic always has an Unstarving
Yes,
musician.
you can get a cube.
Yes, I could just get a cube.
Because like honestly, you can order one of those like blank and then just get yours.
Man, tips
And you just gotta
already.
swap between the shows.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna look for that. Well, what did you think? We haven't really talked since Podcast Movement 2021 in Nashville. What did you think of it?
I what can I say? It was interesting. I will say the podcast movement, um, either I didn't pick the best sessions to attend, or just I just felt like I didn't get that much out of it, to be honest. I
Ah,
felt like as an industry professional or someone who knows a bit more than the basic stuff,
mhm.
I felt like to get tips, I think that it was a very expensive trip.
I wonder
Just
if the
tips.
Evolutions event would be more to your needs.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm still like next year I'm still gonna be coming to the one in it's here in Dallas.
I'll
So
be
I'll
there.
definitely yes, awesome. Yes. So that's like that was my takeaway. But again, next year, like again, I'm gonna try to get a ticket, like try to get a hookup from someone. And again, I'll be home, so I don't have to worry about like paying for a hotel. So for
Cool. We'll
sure. I
crash at
mean,
your place. No, just kidding.
yeah,
Just kidding.
like Arlington, hello. Actually, like Pat, I don't know if he comes. I'll probably be like, "Bruh, you gonna stay over? We hang out." Um, anyway, I'm still in touch with Pat. Getting to meet you, Pat, and meeting in person Travis from Poddex
Oh,
was
cool.
really my highlight. Oh, and meeting Tanner. Did you get to meet Tanner?
I don't know. I don't remember Tanner.
Hmm.
What was his deal?
He is a podcast producer now. He released his own like he's more focusing on his own stuff. He's like awesome. He has a two shows. One is called Podcasting Sucks,
I like
and
that.
he does a daily show, and he does like he takes questions from people. He's a pretty cool guy. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I'll have to look
I'll
up his
introduce you.
podcast.
All I do these days is like, hey Roberto, I think you'll want to meet about these people.
I noticed that. I saw you tagging me, trying to introduce me. Oh, by the way, for people that are listening, and yes, we did start already, Anna. Anna, thank you for joining me for this conversation today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Finally, getting this thing sorted. I think we talked about like me being on your show when we actually met at Podcast Movement,
Hmm.
2021. So it's been a minute, and I am so excited to be here and tell you all the things. I hope I'm up to scratch with all the people that have been here before.
Oh, I'm sure. And the podcast has been a little all over the place, and we'll actually we can talk about that in a second. Yeah, back to your podcast movement comments. It took me, I kind of felt like I jumped off script in terms of the sessions I thought I was going to go to and the ones that I ended up going to. And as you know, I basically missed a day. So it's kind of funny that you're telling me like, I didn't feel like I got that much out of it. You were there for most of it, right? Like
Yeah.
all,
Wait. Did you say you missed? Was it the last day that you missed?
I think so. Because it
Okay.
was
To be
like after,
honest.
wasn't that after the Questlove deal?
Yes.
Yeah.
So on the last day of Podcast Movement, you left, and I went, I believe, to two sessions. And again, was it a user error? Perhaps. But I was like, what am I doing here? It was so cold in the hotel. To be honest, by the way, like I am 32, but in my soul, I'm like a granny. Like I'm cold all the time. And I was like, because obviously, like by that point, I guess they expected still thousands of people for that event. And it was like honestly desert, like tumbleweeds rolling around, barely any people. And so it was incredibly cold. And I was like, I'm just going to take my computer, go back to my hotel room, and watch it from there. So I actually watched 2 sessions from there.
Oh,
So,
good.
I was like, I'm still going to be here, but I still had client work to do. And I was like,
Yeah,
probably I want to like make sure that I still, uh, like listen to what's happening. But I'll say you didn't miss much on that last day.
yeah. And there were so many sessions too, and I don't know the trick to finding the right ones. I mean, there were a couple, maybe one of which you were in, and I mean, I'm sure that was a good value for some people, but I think there was it Aweber that was there, and they were kind of just going through specific strategies using their tools. And I'm not an Aweber user, so and they weren't really talking general enough for me, but for anybody who wasn't a Weber user or was thinking about being one, it was, I'm sure, great. But those kind of things weren't so good. The keynotes I enjoyed. And then I just found, I don't know, like maybe 3 sessions. I was like, I'm glad I came to this. And I didn't know I was going to. And it was largely the presenters though, too. Content, obviously, but the presenters were nice. I actually saw one that John Lee Dumas was at, and it was a really small group of people that were there. And he was actually on stage for a bit with the main presenter, which was kind of fun. So
Cool. I think I will have to say to kind of like paint a picture. So Roberto and I were like husband and wife for conference level. Like we were literally hanging out with each other every day.
true.
And I will say that Roberto was like getting his money's worth. He was like, I want to talk to this person. Let me go to the guy of Lipson. Let me go and hang out with this guy. Like you were all over, like getting all the connections you wanted to get done. It was awesome. I was like, this guy is like, yeah. So I actually like really, I was very impressed. I was like, this guy will talk to anybody. And so I think that you got your money's worth, sir, because you were just like making all the connections.
Well, I'm glad to hear the observation because honestly, I feel like, man, I do not make enough of these. I need to like force myself to talk to some people. And, sometimes you connect with people, sometimes you don't, or like it's, you can't really do much for each other no matter what, no matter how hard you try. But like you, I did get to see a couple of friends, which was cool. And that was probably a lot of what you heard me doing. Like, oh, I want to go see Rob from Libsyn. I don't think I've ever seen him in person. I want to ask him a question anyway about his new home studio. And then I saw a podcaster slash musician who's been podcasting forever and has like 5 or 6 of them and some of them do really well too.
Yeah,
So
I was with you by then. That was
yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that you got to meet some people that were just you knew of, or that you maybe like me, you hadn't met in person before, because that's probably the funnest thing. And yes, it was a pleasure meeting you and some of the others that we hung out with. And it was nice to have a lunch buddy and someone to kick around with. So that was cool. Yeah, you were my podcast movement wife. It was great. So when I was telling you earlier that this podcast is a bit all over the place, it was born of a community based largely in California, which was a bunch of mom and pop solopreneurs. But I quickly realized, I would really like to talk to small business owners. And I also realized I wasn't that enamored with talking to the internet entrepreneur that, like all the time. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so I've tried to speak to people. Like I've spoken with an organic farmer in Panama. She's an expat from some Scandinavian country, but she speaks fantastic Spanish. I have spoken with a chocolatier from San Jose, California. So an old friend from Texas that actually, worked one of my very first jobs with, who has this for many years, a business selling blades for the industry that does woodwork. And he's had like a great story, and he's a great business person. And so those have been the most fun for me. But then I went through this period where, because the Unstarving Musician's my baby, as you know, and that's the one I've just devoted all of my time to. And then this one was kind of a stepchild, and I'm like, I really do enjoy talking to business people. I feel like, I don't know, there's just something. Well, I was getting a little overwhelmed for one thing, but then I thought, what would be cool? I'm going to reboot this thing again. I did rebrand it at one point, but I thought I'm going to explore the intersection between creativity and small business. That would be the thing, and that's what I've been trying to do lately. Okay, so that leads me to I think that you bring a lot of creativity that I can see on the surface to your business. And one of them, maybe not even the most creative facet of what you do, but one of them is the whimsy that you express on Instagram. And I would like to know where you get your sense of humor, if you have any inspiration for that, and how and what inspires you to integrate that into what you do in business.
I will say that honestly, I am a goofball. My husband is always saying like you're ridiculous, and I'm like, yeah, but it's for the whole world to see. I deeply believe that people have to be their authentic selves to engage and connect with others. It won't affect your clout. It won't affect your professional path. I don't think, unless you're like in a, I don't know, if you're a lawyer and you have to be like very serious in court, whatever. But even that, to be honest, I think that deeply connections happen when you are your true self, no matter the medium. And I am an incredible. I would say I thrive on hyperbole and social interactions, and so that's what you see. I'm not an introvert, and a lot of people like, oh my god, like you must be super introvert because you showcase so much personality on social media. I'm like, no, that is me. I guess there's that tendency that if you're an introvert, that's how you showcase your personality online, because obviously you're doing that for your phone. I just like through my career, I've always worked in jobs that I had to talk to a lot of people, and there were always like jobs that require a lot of either being a radio host or working in a coffee shop, like dealing with like thousands of clients, or working for a nonprofit, and you have to engage with like all types of people. And I just love talking to people, and I feel like I make no limitation from the offline me and the online me. And I, as a podcast producer and coach slash all the things, I tell that to my clients all the time. I mean, like, if you're vanilla, nobody connects with vanilla. Like the quirkiest things, like the most random things they're really passionate about, like that's what you need to bring to your online communication, because that is the gate to people connecting with you. That's what makes you stand out. So that's like, I know I'm a brand strategist. Like I have a ton of experience in marketing, even though I didn't study for that. I just like learned that on the job. And that's the thing. I'm like, I know this is what's gonna either break. I mean, I know I'm not for everybody, but I'm like, well, the people that connect, and I don't care about anyone else. So yes, I am also the kind of person that I was like, well, if I'm telling this one thing to my clients, I need to pave the way. So I'm just like going like full on, and I'm like, hey, did you see this? And they're like, I did, and you're ridiculous. I'm like, you don't need to take it that high. You can go a bit low. So I just show them what's possible. I guess that's what a lot of what I do. I know I'm getting a really long-winded answer over here. But that's pretty much what I do. I just show people, like, one thing is for you to say, you have to be creative. Another way is just be creative, right? Like show them. That has a major impact, showing versus telling.
Yeah. Well, and authenticity, it's a word for me overused, right? But and I like the advice that, or at least the thought, we need to be creative. But you seem like you just actually enjoy it. And I guess that comes from, like you said, you're just a natural goofball. I think now hearing that and watching you here, you were a little reserved at Podcast Movement. I mean, you're a little bit, I think I bonded with you because I could see you're kind of a silly person before I even saw your Instagram, which is great. But you actually enjoy it, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I literally launched my business because I was a goofball in my previous job. I was lucky that the company that I work for, they were like, sure, be a weirdo. Like, we were all weirdos, podcast producers. You have to be, if you're just too plain, you're just not gonna cut it in the job, right? So I felt like I was like almost like they turned the knob a little bit more. And when I launched my business, I think that I was like, if I'm launching my business, I am doing things by my standards. And I'm going to do what I love. I'm going to do what, obviously, like strategically right. Obviously, like every post that I create, it has the pain point in view. But I still like think about like, okay, is this going to be entertaining? Is this relatable? But I guess that's what I'm like, I'm unconsciously competent at the job, you know what I mean? Like I just do that by default, and I think that that's exactly how people connect with you. But at the same time, yes, at Podcast Movement I was a little overwhelmed. It was my first event, even though I've been like all over the world already after like the pandemic hit. I felt like really big pressure on, I'm a business owner, I need to make meaningful connections or at least like get something out of this. So I was kind of like all my sensors were like really overloaded. So actually having a buddy on there like really helped me like, okay, like I'm not just here because it feels daunting when you're by yourself. Again, I've been in conferences before, not for my own company. So I just felt like there was like this whole level of like being alert and like taking opportunities and cha cha cha, all those things. But yeah, it's interesting. Yes. Also, like, I guess we were both wearing a mask. So they kind of
Yeah.
like my whole face moves in like 1,000 ways when I talk. So having a mask, I guess, kind of like hinders that. So maybe that was why.
Could be. I was feeling a lot of the same overwhelm, and we didn't even mention the fact that, well, you'd allude to it. And I don't know how recently you had traveled, but that was the first time I'd been to the States since before, probably October before the pandemic began. So that was stressful. And I'm going to Nashville, which I have family there, which is was fantastic. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, this isn't one of those states where everybody's like super careful. I think that's my impression. And I'm like, am I gonna, people are gonna be like verbally assaulting me for wearing a mask? These kind of
Yeah.
things are in the back of
Yeah.
your head. Of course, it was nothing but pleasantry. I think the whole time I was there, I saw somebody looking at me funny because I had a mask, but who knows what they were looking at? So maybe it was
Right.
my
To be
hair.
honest, maybe they were just like, you seem familiar. Is he famous? I can't tell. I rather think about that.
I need to remember that one. So the other part of your creativity, I would imagine, comes from the experience that you have, which, if I remember correctly, you have some radio broadcasting experience and maybe some other things in there too. How do you feel that has lends itself to what you do and some of the creative aspects of what you do?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I think like I feel and feel free to debate me on this. I feel like that there's two types of people who are creatives at heart. They're either creative at taking one idea and really taking it and making it their own, or they're just like really creative at inception of ideas. And I fall onto the first category. I look at something and I'm like, how can I enjoy that, or how can I make that? I always loved like sewing. I was always like I always like, this is the epitome of me. When I was on gosh, now this is where I'm like, oh, what do you call in America, like when you're from first grade to fourth grade? What is that? Elementary school?
Yeah, elementary,
Okay.
primary, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say primary. The funny thing is that like there was this point where like I thought that, okay, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I was like, on Monday, I'm going to be a policeman that rides a horse. On Tuesday, I'm going to be a ballet dancer. On Thursday, I'm going to be a veterinarian. And it's just like, I had like a job for each day because I was just had like, there's a term for this. There's like a TED talk kind of like on this that is about how you can be a very creative being and have all of these talents. And it's kind of like it's just
Only
pretty much
imaginative.
maybe and you just have all of these like skill sets and you're like, oh, I don't know what my passion is, but I just love all the things and trying different things. And since I was very young, I love talking and like meeting people and being around people. And I think that I am a sponge and I just love getting all of the different things. Like I love DIYing. My husband also started like woodworking, and you were talking about like the blades for woodworking. And I was like, I need to check that interview. I just don't think like we are all creative. It just depends on how you absorb that and how you implement that. A lot of people have like a lot of hangups on, oh, I need to, if I am creative, I must be creative, like original creative. And I'm like, no, like you can use your creativity in all sorts of ways. Like when we were kids, and these are not my words, but this was from either I think it was a Japanese speaker on TED Talk. I'm just like talking about TED Talks today. And he was like, how it shifts when we are little. We're like, oh, that drawing is so amazing. Oh my God, that's wonderful. And then at some point in age, like, that's not good enough anymore, right? And it like becomes garbage. And he was saying like we need to practice creativity in our daily lives. It doesn't need to be perfect. Like, do you like singing? Take singing classes. Sure, you may not be able to like get the notes or even sound like what most people say, like good or whatever. But like if that's what you enjoy, if it brings you joy and it fuels that side of you that likes to create, I mean, go ahead. And we need to be more intentional on doing things that are not work work focused or they don't have just a specific objective.
Yeah, and I think my observation is in your case, you have a great imagination and have kept a lot of it from your childhood, so that has helped you out. You know, on this note of creativity and being creative daily, it just reminds me, there's this artist, music artist. Well, he's actually a visual and music artist based in San Antonio, Texas. His name is Chris Taylor, who's been on the Unstarving Musician a couple of times. And his advice is, well, his thing that he does is he tries to make something creative every day,
Awesome.
no matter how big or small. And he's, you know, other musicians that know him, for instance, say he's one of the most prolific musicians and he's an artist. And I just learned after having, it's been more than a couple of years since we first met through the podcast, that the painting he does, much of it happens while he's on stage performing music. And I didn't even know that until recently.
What?
I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah. So I got to go see one of his shows one of these days, right?
That is amazing. You see, that's the thing. I feel like a lot of people, again, down to the how we were conditioned growing up, like there's one straight thing. And again, this is also very down much to education, where people tell you like there's one way, there's one answer, there's like one path. I'm like, it's not. Like we're living more and more, many years. It doesn't matter. Like if you were an accountant for 20 years, if you really love woodworking, man, go for it. Like what's the purpose of like living a life if you're just going to do something just because, you know, you started doing that forever ago and there's like the safety net? Sure, you don't have to go for it, but I mean, just feel free to experience different mediums and try out things. The fear of judgment is like so real. But I feel like now we're experiencing more and more thanks to the pandemic. Thank you. That was a positive thing. People are like, well, I really enjoy doing this one thing and I really devoted myself to it. And now I'm actually like either just doing more of it or like that became a business. You don't have to capitalize on every talent. You don't have to capitalize on any talent if you don't want to. So it's just down to like how can you incorporate that to make you a happier being, and you'll just do everything better. And like, if painting on stage is like what you do, like go ahead. Like I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, here's a segue for you then. How, and this gets into podcasting a little bit and other things too, but what are your best tips for helping creative people avoid overwhelm or mitigate it?
Well, I think that it's not to fight the creative flow. I would say that to me, there's like two main things. So one, I plan creative time. One of the things that we do in my company at the podcast space is to provide actionable tips for podcasters. And I know my clients, they're like my clients or potential clients, like the people that I'm serving. You have a lot of creativity and then you burn out and then you go through and you like this period of like not talking to anyone, not publishing any content, not doing anything. It's just like life does not need to be like that. And if you organize kind of batching times, batching is my second name right now, to be honest. When you are in the mindset of being creative, sometimes it just doesn't happen. But if you train yourself to start being creative in these like 2-hour blocks, you'll be like, oh my gosh, like I get so much done. And when you're in flow, everything, like if you're editing a podcast and you're like, oh, I really love this takeaway, just go and cut that. Don't wait until the end of the episode to be like, what am I gonna take away from this episode? What is my audiogram? Where's the blah, blah, blah? Like if you're in it and you're like something pops up, just like start like copying that, save it. And just like blocking time really helps you be more productive for a longer period of time. Because again, we have our phones constantly pinging around us. We have like 300, I don't know if about you, I always have like 17 tabs open on my computer. And it's hard to focus like that. And then I have clients like, hey, this happened, or hey, can I have your advice on this? So just saving that time and being creative for that period of time and batching will save, I think like what we wrote a few weeks ago was like, you lose 30 to 40% of your focus when you are doing multiple things, when you're multitasking and you're not batching, or like at least like saving yourself solid minutes to just work on something. So creativity is, you know, if you're feeling creative, just say, okay, I'm gonna like not do whatever else I'm doing, just focus on writing down all the ideas, right? All the things. I always I work with Asana, so it's a digital CRM. well, I use it for both managing clients and my own projects. So I just add all of these ideas there. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, I'm in a creative funk. So I just go there on those ideas. I have voice memos. Voice memos are also great. And I would say, like, honestly, some people struggle, a lot of podcasters struggle with sitting down and recording the podcast. And I'm like, one, who told you need to sit down? You don't, right? If you're doing a solo episode, grab your computer and take it to the backyard. Maybe record there, or record standing, or take like one of those lavalier mics that they cost, $50 or whatever, and just like get it hook up to your phone and just go for a walk and record there. Like, make whatever it is that you're doing match your daylight, you're kind of like your routine, right? That's the most important thing. Like, don't fight it and don't follow someone else's process just because. Like, find your own. But people can feel really overwhelmed because they don't know where to start. So my other tip is just find a process that works for you and tackle one thing at a time. Just because if you're trying to renovate the whole process, it's going to feel so overwhelmed and you're going to forget, you're going to break things in the meantime. So just focus on fixing one problem at a time, or don't fix a problem, just make it streamlined, just reduce a few steps, book a time with someone who, or like ask a friend, hey, like this is my process, how do you do things? Talk to people. So I would say probably like 4 tips. Recapping. One is actually be structured about your creative time. Don't fight the flow, just like go for it, batch, right? And then stick to a process and don't renovate too many things at the same time.
What about, I know podcasters will love this and probably any business owner, but what are your best tips for growing a podcast on a limited budget? Every indie podcaster's dilemma.
Yes. Okay. So actually, this is something that they also touched on Podcast Movement. And I was like, I'm glad someone else is talking about this. So if you want to grow your podcast, focus on 2 things. One, only focus on the social media or the online platforms that your audience already is at, or your ideal customer hangs out in, or your ideal customer if like you're using your podcast to grow your business. Like, a lot of people do all the things, right? Like, they are writing show notes for the podcast, they're writing the newsletter, they're writing social media posts. I use a platform called later.com that allows you to upload like a content piece, and the platform will say, hey, which social media channels do you want to upload this at the same time? And I just select which ones. And so I just go in and it will say, hey, there's the copy, make some amendments for like Twitter. So, you have like to reduce your character counts or whatever. But once that's done, you save it and like you literally scheduled something. I do my social media for the week within 2 hours. So from creating the graphics, thinking about the copy and scheduling all within 1 hour, to 1 hour and a half, depends on my flow, but again, because I'm sticking to that, like, okay, within this hour I'm just gonna go and get this done. And that's something that, like, really focus on one platform and dedicate time engaging there with your audience. Is I feel like a lot of podcasters just put out their stuff, right? Like, oh, here's an audiogram and the episode is out, but they never spend time engaging with people. Like, you already speak to yourself when you're doing the show. Use social media to engage with your community, to get podcast ideas, to get like podcast engagement. Just use that time wisely. Post less, engage more. And my other tip would be on other people's shows. The people that have an audience similar to yours. So if either the topic is the same, but the approach is different, if they're related topics, or if you just see, okay, like these are people who, let's say you sell sneakers, whatever, and your company sells sustainable sneakers. Like, go on podcasts who talk about corporate social responsibility. Go to podcasts that would, maybe talk about like food, like footwear or something like that. Like, go to your competitors' podcasts. Like, people struggle for content, and once the audience aligns, the conversion from becoming like your listeners and dedicated listeners is way easier than you just like posting stuff out there and hope for the best. Those are my 2 tips.
Do you budget? Is there special time that you use as engagement time that's outside of the batching, the social media content going out, or is it all wrapped into that time?
No. So what I actually do, again, I work from home. all of my team members are remote. So my husband works from home as well, but I'm like, I have the itch to talk to people. So I use social media for that. But here's the most effective thing. On your, let's say, Instagram, you can always get analytics on when your audience is live, and just go onto that time and comment there and engage with them. Now, here's also the thing. Everyone is on social media all the time. Just be intentional. No one can tell me that they don't go and open Instagram or Facebook at least twice a day. Like, I don't believe it, right? Unless you're like on a diet, on a Facebook diet or like Instagram diet or whatever. Just instead of just scrolling and being a consumer, engage, be an activator. That's just the thing. Like, start small. Just if you're like, I don't know what to do, just put an alarm on your calendar, like engage on social media for 10 minutes. I mean, what is 10 minutes of your day, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that.
And it's just cumulative. It just goes, when you start doing that, it just compounds and you'll start seeing the same names, the same people engaging. And the algorithm is going to be like, oh, this person is not just like spreading out like stuff and not using the social media. So the algorithm itself on social media is going to be like, oh, I really like this person engaging again. Let's start showing posts again to other people.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, last one. Probably.
Last
Depends.
one?
Depends.
Oh, okay.
you may just say something like, okay, I got to ask about that. No, the podcast space provides a pretty wide range of services. So what I read on the website, strategy, editing, distribution, digital marketing, coaching, and consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage all that? And are there areas that you are open to talking about in terms of like, these are our super sweet spots and this is one that I want to grow the next year in 2022?
Okay, awesome. Yes. So actually we're fully booked up on editing clients, retainer clients. Like, I'm literally not taking any more. Sorry if you're really...
bread and butter.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So now what we're doing is just taking consulting clients. We had these deal for Black Friday, not anymore. It was discount on these like 1 hour Q&A. So something that I noticed, that we had audits available. Those are $997. Sorry, those are strategy sessions. So strategy sessions and audits are things that are like a higher price point that you normally come to me and say, hey, I've been podcasting for a year. I can't get my podcast to work. I would say 9 times out of 10, the podcast idea that people have and the business they have don't align. Because people just think, oh, I'll just start talking to these business owners. But they never on the podcast mention things like, hey, I actually take clients, or if you'd like to work with me. They don't make that a very obvious choice. People have trouble selling. And if you have trouble selling, a podcast is not going to serve you unless you're just literally using a podcast to build connections with that person. And then after the call, like, oh my God, Roberto, we had a great time. Like, let's hang out and like, let's go for a coffee. And then you learn about my services. I'll learn about your services. Like, that's the only reason if you have a podcast that's going to convert better. But if you want to convert listeners into paying customers, you really need to tell them like constantly that you do take clients. Because again, people do multiple things when they're podcasting, when they're listening to a podcast. They may not really pay attention. They may have missed an episode. So your whole strategy needs to align. Like, if you are providing solutions to people's problems, you have to talk about these problems. There's this podcaster that I recommend everyone to listen to. Her name is Denise DT. Her name is Denise Devil Thomas, but it's hard. So her podcast is called Chill and Prosper. And she's an entrepreneur from Australia. And my God, she is the clear example of someone using a podcast who knows her ideal listener through and through. So when she talks about the problems that she knows, like for instance, I'm having, she knows that like, as a female entrepreneur, I want to help everybody, but I may struggle with sending an invoice to everybody because I'm like, I just want to help. I'm in the business of helping people. So she has books, she has a boot camp, and just by default, people take, if they just were recommended your show or something like that, it can take up to 6 months or more for someone to become like such a loyal fan of the show that they buy, right? So to convert someone takes a while. And I think it was a month before I started listening to her podcast. Within a month, I had bought her book.
Nice.
So it works. But again, I'm listening and I'm like, oh God, the knees get out of my head. Seriously. Like, oh my God, she's describing how I engage with people. She's like, there's these podcast episodes. And again, titles are super important. She has stuff like how to turn brain pickers into paying customers, which is something that I struggle as a female entrepreneur because I want to help everybody. My female friends, same thing. So I have actually sent this specific episode that I relate to, like, to everyone. And a friend of mine already bought her book as well. So it's just one of these things that when you gel with a podcaster, you gel with a podcaster, but you need to know who you're talking to. So that is where, like, I help people understand that, like, how can you talk directly? Like, and that comes to social media as well. When I post things and people are like, oh my God, get out of my head. Oh my God, I just experienced this. Oh, I really needed this today. Those are the key elements that tell you, like, your audience knows what you do. They know that you also understand them. So that's something that I am super passionate about. It's helping people align their podcast with something that will help their business grow. Because again, you can do it for, as long as you want, but you'll stay more engaged if you actually have like feedback from people like, oh my gosh, thank you for that episode. It was great. How can I buy your products? Blah, blah, blah. So that's something that like I do a lot. And those Q&As that I do, it's a service that is $320. And I'm like, I cannot just have a high price point on something that, sometimes people are not in a place where they can afford all of that money. So that's something that, by the way, for podcasters is a tip, and entrepreneurs, if you hear something enough, do something about it, right? Like if people keep saying, I'm sorry, I cannot afford your product, then offer a lower tier kind of
version
offer
or something.
yeah, exactly. Like so I was like, okay, like there's a lot of people that just wanted to meet with me, and like, I want you to tell me what's wrong with my podcast, and then I can walk away and fix it. And it's incredible if you have your questions written down, how much you can get out in an hour. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people just, hey, I'm not committed to do that, but I can, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. So that is the thing that if people want to talk to me, I would love to just do that, because it's something that I'm like super passionate about. At the podcast space, I wanted to create a company that I was like, I help podcasters and entrepreneurs who are working toward the betterment of their communities. Either your business idea is to help the world become a better place, or your podcast is about educating your community. Pretty much everyone who's podcasting is doing that. If you have a great idea, okay, let's figure out and tweak it, and normally it works very well, but you have to sometimes get a different pair of eyes and ears on your content to be like, oh, there's this one thing that you keep saying, but there's nothing on your website, right? Like I heard it time and time again, and I cannot find it on the website. How can you talk about this? And then people go, and the user experience path is kind of broken, so people are not actioning on it. Sometimes you're doing all the right things, but there's just small tweaks that you need to do. And actually, side note, we do have free resources on the website. So we have show notes template, which also includes prompts. And we have that on the website. If you sign up to the newsletter, you'll receive it as a downloadable on your email. So I just want people to just like write amazing show notes, and our copywriter kind of drafted that, and I added my little spiel on it. So it's a team effort, but I honestly know that's going to help podcasters not just write 3 lines, because that's actually the average. People do like 20 characters. It's just like something like this, 3 lines. And I'm like, seriously, you couldn't add anything else? Not even links to your website? Come on.
Yeah. Okay. And they can get that free resource and all the other ones at thepodcastspace.com, right?
That is correct.
And they can find all yours. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll give you all the links. You can use those on the show notes. And now we're like, oh yeah, all the show notes. Go to Roberto. He'll have the goods.
Yeah. And I loved working with you on this episode already, even though it's not done. We just sort of doing the interview piece of it, but you gave me so much great stuff to work with, and a really nice bio, suggested questions. And I had the greatest, I'm going to send you this after we're done. I had the greatest solicitation for someone who wanted to come on my show. And I learned he got it from John Lee Dumas, so maybe you've seen it before. But I told him, I responded, I'm like, congrats, that's the best solicitation I've ever seen. Let's do it. So,
oh my God, really I want to see it.
I'll send it to you. Yeah, it was great. But oh man, thanks for sharing all that. It sounds like you disclosed your real passion places and within the business. And Cool. I'm glad that you guys are doing so well. You're overwhelmed with one type of service and ready to just sort of focus on the others where you feel you can do the most damage or service to your clients.
Yes. Actually, I'm working on getting a course out for podcasters. And
Nice.
here's the deal. I know podcasters are overwhelmed. They have like all the plates spinning, all the fingers on the pies. So it will be something that actually you can sign up on the podcast space as well. We have a course page, so you just go in and like you'll be the first to know. But it's really helping podcasters. So here's the problem: as a creative, I have like 3 course ideas, and I'm like, realistically, what is doable to be achieved by March? So I'm managing on that, but I think honestly, the creative economy and the course creation arena are just like amazing ways to empower people to have more resources. You can Google, you can watch YouTube videos for hours, but if someone is providing a resource that you can implement today in your business, you're not wasting your time. I mean, like that's something that is incredible, and that I am so happy that we're living in this era that you can just create something and help thousands of people besides the one-on-one, which is so limiting, right? So I love that, that we can hopefully help more people at the end of 2022. That's my goal.
That would be fantastic. I know you will. And we'll talk some more after this. Thank you again for coming on Morning Tempo. And it's such a pleasure to catch up with you after the many, many weeks that have gone by since we met.
Thank you, Roberto. It was always so good to get to know you and talk again, because you're awesome. And yes, subscribe to his podcast, subscribe to all the things Roberto has, because he knows his stuff. He's awesome.
That's kind of you. Okay, well, hopefully we'll see you around the holidays too. Okay, have a wonderful afternoon. Please help other creative entrepreneurial types find this podcast by following it on your favorite audio service. If you like what I do on this podcast and would like to help me do more with the podcast, please sign up for the Morning Tempo Insiders community newsletter. You can do so by visiting morningtempo.com. It's free. The newsletter and occasional email from me is filled with tips and insights for your creative entrepreneurial journey. It's based on experience, expertise, and knowledge of my podcast guests, various other marketing and sales pros that I follow, and personal research that I do for business. And you'll get details on the latest episodes of the podcast. And if you really like what I'm doing here, visit morningtempo.com/crowd sponsor for more information about producer and sponsorship opportunities. All right, I am out. Thank you so much for listening. Ciao for now. Hey there, Robonzo again. Just one last thing. I have something here for you. I'm just going to call a rotten Easter egg because it's kind of a surprise because it's coming in at the very end. But it's just to say, if you love the sound of my voice, appreciate my interview style, and want to hear all the things that independent musicians have in common with the folks I interview for this podcast, then you should check out my Unstarving Musician podcast. You can find it wherever you get your favorite podcasts and at unstarvingmusician.com.